All right, Garrett. Like I said, man, good catching up with you. It's been, I guess, I was looking here. I can't believe it's been 6.5 years, literally. Like that's
I know,
crazy. Like that's
I know.
insane. Like
Yeah.
I don't know where the time went. Like I've been at Fairmont now for four plus years, and I just can't
Oh,
imagine that it's
wow.
been 6.5 since I've been at KP.
Yeah.
So, but I'm definitely excited chatting with you, catching up with you. I know you got obviously done a lot of great things at KP and got some other things kind of on
Thank you.
the horizon coming up, moving over to the high school sector. So we'll definitely chip away at as many questions I can get to because I know, like I said, you gotta get out of here in less than an hour. So we'll kind of move through this, but we'll elaborate on as much as what you want because, like I said, I think there's gonna be a lot of good information here. So just to kind of give like all the guys that are gonna watch this, guys and girls are gonna watch us. Like when I was at KP. I was the strength coach there, and then when I left and went to the minor leagues, that's when you came in. And like I said, just
Yeah.
you being there for 6.5 years now, you guys are just taking everything to just another level, multiple levels above what I was able to do whenever I was there. So, kind of just give everybody a little bit about your background. Obviously, where you were before KP, being at KP, kind of just an overview of what you've been doing at Kinetic Pro. I guess I should be saying Kinetic Pro Performance. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, and just kind of what your role's been there over the last 6.5 years.
Yeah. So, grew up in Indiana, where I played football and baseball in high school. Decided to play college baseball at Manchester University. Year one, tore my labrum. Decided that probably my dreams of being a major league baseball player was probably not going to happen. Um, so I still played all 4 years, but my main focus during the last 3 years of college was to intern as much as I possibly could, read blogs, YouTube videos, everything I could possibly get my hands on to become the best strength coach I could be. So after my undergraduate at Manchester University, decided to come down to University of Tampa to get my master's degree in exercise nutrition science. And midway through that, that's when I got the job as director of strength conditioning at KineticPro Performance. And I've been at KP for about 6.5 years now. And I just recently took a job as athletic performance coordinator at Indian Rocks Christian School in Largo, Florida. Before KP, I was an intern in every type of sport at Manchester, high school sports, anything I could get my hands on. UTSA over in San Antonio, Texas. So working as many different avenues, data scientist at UT with the catapult and the soccer teams, BBT with Justin Thiel over at University of Tampa. So before I ever got to KP, I had about 4 years of experience, not just hands-on, but also with like watching YouTube videos and trying to create as many programs as possible, training myself. I've competed in Olympic weightlifting, competed in powerlifting before, so training myself up to that point. And then when I got to KP, I guess you could say I niched down into the pitching side of things. I was a pitcher in college. So it worked out really well when I came to KP, just knowing the strength and conditioning, lifting myself, and then playing college baseball. Um, and then based off of that, my first big project was our KP bands. So I started that in March of 19, so about 2 months after I started, which is the first dynamic bands model approach to bands training. We have developed that. That took about 3 years to develop. And then my most recent thing that I've been working on or project is still don't know what it's called, but it's a skill coefficient that allows the exercise itself to be quantified based off of multiple facets, multiple variables, but ability to create a single variable or a single unit to track workload management in the weight room to give us a better representation of that. While creating those two inventions, I guess, trained over 300 pro athletes, hundreds and probably 2,000, 3,000 college and high school athletes ranging from ages 12 all the way up to the pros uh, simultaneously with that. Can't hear you, Adam.
Sorry, I muted myself and I forgot. I knew you played baseball, and I thought I knew you were a pitcher. I thought there was an injury, and that's kind of very similar. We interviewed Casey last year, I think. I know it it was either last winter or last summer. Very similar path with him is like, dealing with injuries and figuring out like, okay, there's got to be a better way to train and play baseball and, be less likely to get injured. So it's kind of a very similar genesis to honestly, a lot of strength coaches that kind of follow that
Yeah.
same path of just, our own careers. We're hampered for some reason and we don't want to be better, figure out a way to be better for our athletes. When you were at Mansfield, did you guys have a strength coach? Were you guys training? Was it, I mean, you don't have to like talk negative about the strength coach if you guys had one, but like, was it something that you look back at it and there were some things that you guys were doing well and some things that you definitely weren't doing? I mean, do you think that was a factor of why you had a shoulder injury?
Um, so when I was at Manchester,
Or sorry,
we
Manchester, my fault. I was saying Mansfield,
yeah, you're
Manchester,
good.
my fault.
It's up in Indiana. It's not the one over in England. I get that a lot too. Uh, but to be honest with you, one of the biggest appeals to being recruited to that school was that from October to January, there was freedom and to do what I wanted from a lifting standpoint. So we really didn't have a specific strength coach for our team. We got to do our own thing, which I've probably majority of the things that I've learned from a training standpoint probably came during that time. Just lifting with buddies, lifting with my friends. I have one friend that's a silver level Olympic weightlifter, so just under the Olympics. Other one has competed in power worlds and power lifting. Training next to those two guys, I was mediocre at both.
Right.
So, but being able to have that freedom. That being said, I've worked with they have some track and field strength coaches there. Being a D3 school, they really didn't have like an assigned strength coach for multiple sports. It was either just a like skills coach of a football team that wanted to take things over, or another like a throws coach for the track and field. And I just worked with them. And as an intern, these were my first couple years just trying to learn. So I really just sat back and listened. Really didn't try to like tell them what to do because, to be honest with you, I didn't know what I was doing. And as an intern, I think that's the biggest thing is being able to just understand, like, I'm trying to observe and learn what I like, what I don't like. Unless the coach asks you, and hopefully you're in a setting where the head coach or whoever you're working with asks you, like, hey, what can I do better? And having that openness and honest, transparent communication, be like, hey, how can I improve? Because as an intern, it's a new set of eyes on the systems that you've already created as a coach. So kind of role reversal on that is you see like, okay, I need to be more as the guy that everyone's looking up to. Like I have to be the one that's asking, like, hey, where do you see the athletes falling off at? Where faults do you see within the program to be able to be actually to get better at your own craft, but also having the helping hands and eyes of a new person in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point of just the idea of like, and obviously like for me, well, let me go back and touch on something real quick. Like, so what was when you went to UT, was that like the kind of the first time that you had really got a chance to see like an actual like strength and conditioning department at like a collegiate level then basically because of just, I mean, they've always had legit, like when Justin was there, obviously having legit S&C program. Was that kind of like your first like big like eye-opening experience? Because I know like when I did my first internship at WVU with football, I was like, oh, like wow, like this is what being a strength coach is about. It's not like one-on-one situations. Like very rarely it's one coach and you got 30 athletes running around and you're trying to control chaos. Like was that kind of like a big eye-opening experience for you, just being able to see that college weight room setting?
Yeah, it was. So I had my junior year, between my junior and senior year of my undergrad, I had an internship at UTSA,
Okay, that's what it was. Okay.
University of Texas San Antonio, um, and that's where my first experience of actually being able to see what a collegiate setting like strength coach.
Right.
Um, I was with the Olympic sports, but I was just around enough to get to know the football coaches and stuff. And the one thing I'll never forget is their head strength football coach every morning, it would be like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. And just the way he like opens the door was the most aggressive thing I've ever seen in my life. And when it first happened, I was like, oh, what is that? What's up with this guy? And then I realized like, oh, that's just him in general. That's just him. Like that's what a strength coach looks like, especially for a football strength strength coach is like that energy, that absolute like just killer mentality is like something that like you see, and that's the biggest thing I've taken away from like that specific, because I didn't really work with the football team. Was like, okay, that's the energy that when you go to a collegiate setting, that's the expectation. That's the energy you have to bring every single day at 5 a.m. when the guys are tired, when the guys just woke up. Like that's the energy
Yeah.
that you have to bring.
Yeah. There's a good book that I'd make most of my coaches, I think I've all read it, The Energy Bus. It's a really good book and just talks about that, about being like, you got to set the tone and be the energy. And it talks about just more in life, but this is completely off topic, but it's related because it's funny. Like the, some of the athletes that we used to have training at the one private gym here in town, they played professional baseball. They went to WVU, and they were saying that their strength coach when they were at WVU was a football strength coach, and he would just come over and help with the baseball, like run the baseball program. And they said that every single session he would get himself so worked up that he would have to go puke in the trash can because he was just like off his rocker, like just whacked out
Yeah.
of his mind, just crazy type guy. But I don't think you need to be like that, like especially in our settings all the time. But there's definitely value, but just kind of a little funny side story. So, but what I wanted to kind of ask you with like, you mentioned, oh shoot, now I lost my train of thought. You mentioned like the intern aspect. Like I run our internship program, obviously at Fairmont. I do some stuff here at the one private gym in town. And like, I say this every semester, like I feel like I learn as much, or I get as much value out of running those internship programs as I do being a head strength coach, because every single semester there's something that gets brought up that makes me think about something differently. So it's one of those where, like you mentioned about being an intern and having a mentor that's not afraid to like ask you like, hey, like, what do you think about what we're doing right now? Like, I think there's a huge aspect of just setting your ego aside as a head strength coach, and then also learning from your interns just as much as what they hopefully are learning from you at times. So I think that's just a good point to touch on. So, um, in terms of, I kind of asked this question kind of in two ways. So just like your overarching like standards and philosophy just on training and kind of just being a good trainee, and then also just your overarching standards and philosophies on what strength and conditioning is. I know kind of a very loaded two loaded questions, but just basically take us through that thought process. Like, what is strength and conditioning for us as a strength coach, and then like what should we be kind of thinking about it for our athletes?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think strength and conditioning, our role as a strength coach is to build general preparedness of the body to allow the athletes to express the forces of their skill sport. And if we take it a layer deeper, especially in pitching, we're a high skill sport. We're not like football where a lineman can have a little bit less skill, more physical. So there's a spectrum of like skill, physical. Physical is more of those rugby sports. Skill is like golf, pitching. Those things are very high skill. So when we think about that, the biggest thing we can do as strength coaches is to help them practice their sport longer without interruptions, which means injuries. Because if we look at how skill acquisition is made, we have the cognitive, associative, and the autonomous. And if the athlete is always getting hurt in the cognitive phase or the associative phase, they're never actually getting to autonomous because they're always getting hurt, having to relearn that skill and then try to get back to autonomous. And that's the real goal of a strength coach, being able to outrun the demands of the sport to allow them to practice it longer without interruptions. So when we think about that,
I think that's a great way to really kind of summarize it, because you're true, you're right, and especially from sports that are very technical, are very skill set. Like, and I think of athletes that are coming back from injuries, like one of our pitchers. Like it, you think of like, oh, you're cleared. The doctors have cleared you from your surgery. You should be back to throwing and be able to do all this stuff. But it's like, yeah, but you got to almost relearn that skill. It's been 9 months since you picked up a baseball. Like, you're not going to just be able to pick it up and start off where you left off before. Like, you're going to have to retrain the entire body to move that way, and then also relearn the precise aspects of that skill. So I think that's a very, very important way to just think about not only what we do in terms of just giving athletes, keeping them healthy and giving them more opportunities to build their skill, but also when they are coming back from an injury, if those do occur, like you have to be more patient than probably what we all want to be most of the time.
yeah. And it's tough just because we want to as strength coaches, we love the weight room and we love the max outs. We love the weight. But there's times where we have to be the voice in the room. We have to be the voice of reason, where it's like, hey, this probably isn't the greatest idea for you to do this right before you're trying to do something from a skill standpoint. And from just a training standpoint, being able to manage and monitor something where like athletes want to feel sore and tired. If you're sore and tired and you're trying to learn a skill, you're not learning the skill, you're just surviving that training session. And that's where it's like, as a strength coach, we have to manage that workload from one standpoint to allow them to actually learn the skill. But from a trainee standpoint, from a philosophy standpoint, I guess I have like, basically it filters into three things. It has what adaptation are we trying to elicit, what movement of the body we're trying to train, and then what exercise allows the athlete to have early on success to allow them to actually load up and drive whatever adaptation we're looking at. So like any type of exercise that I'm looking at, it's like, okay, what is the main purpose or intent of this exercise? If it's output, let's say output is producing as much force as possible. Well, I'm going to put the athlete into a position, a stance, an exercise that allows them to do that properly. So think about a deadlift. If for younger kids, let's say high school, if we raise the bar up like 4 inches off the ground for a deadlift, that's probably going to allow them to lift more weight. And if the goal is to produce as much force, well, load is going to drive that force. So I'm going to put them on a trap bar deadlift 4 inches of blocks. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key as a strength coach is we have to be better as an industry at selecting the correct exercise to allow the athlete to have success. And if you're over cueing an athlete too many times, or you have to tell them multiple times, like, hey, that's not how you do it, it's probably not the best exercise we could select that puts them in the right position to drive that specific adaptation. And that goes for every part of the body, every type of adaptation we're looking at power, strength, durability, however you want to define it, whatever words as coaches we use, we have to be able to select those through adaptation. Can't remember the second one I just said, movement, and then exercise.
Yeah. And again, I think that's something we forget about sometimes is we kind of fall in love. And I program to an extent still this way because I think it's kind of checks off the boxes of just like, our fundamental humans, our push, our pulls and hinges and things like that. But it's one of those where like just doing a certain hinge might not be the best training modality. We're stuck with picking an exercise, but that might not be the best modality for the outcome or the adaptation that we're chasing. So there's definitely a specificity in terms of like the adaptation versus a specificity of the actual exercise itself. So, and I'm gonna have a follow-up question and if you don't mind, I'm gonna share the exercise funnel that you sent me as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Screen share here in a second, but one of the other things that you mentioned too about like changing like the biomechanical, like the position of the barbell. I mean, that's something that like at Fairmont we don't do. And honestly, I probably might have started doing that when I was down at KP, just because we had pitchers that were 6'4", 6'5", like just big long guys. Like it doesn't make sense. And at when I was at UT, we did that as well too. When I was at University of Tampa, we did it as well. We're like the basketball team. Those guys that were like 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", like they never deadlifted off the ground. And it was one of those where like I used to think like people were just being soft. Like, no, the deadlift has to start from the ground. Like, but it's like, no, it doesn't. That's stupid. Like, why would that? That's a completely different exercise for a guy that's 6'7" versus me being 5'7". Like, it's not the same exercise. So I agree with you. And it's one of those things where, you think about like if we look at you talk about output, you talk about force, like peak force. When they measure peak force using an isometric thigh pull, the bar is at right above your knees. You're at 117-degree knee angle. So like if we actually want to have high outputs, we actually need to put you in a position that's the most mechanically advantageous for high outputs.
And I think sometimes we as coaches forget how skillful lifting is. We forget how skillful a snatch is, or a clean, or a back squat, or a front squat. Like those are very high skill things. We're just coaches that do them all the time, and it's like, oh, like we think they're easy because we've done them for 10 years. But like a kid that's 6'7" that's never lifted before, he probably has no clue how to move his body in that sequence and that skill level to actually elicit the power production that we're actually trying to elicit them from.
Right.
So I think that's the key thing for a strength coach is like exercise, picking an exercise that suits the athlete the best to drive a specific adaptation is probably the most critical thing as a strength coach we could do.
Right. Can you, if I make this, can you see this? Is this like showing on the screen?
Yeah, I can see it. I'm good. I can remember it.
Okay. Yeah. I
This
mean,
is how
kind of
my brain thinks 24/7. So
yeah, just walk us through this. Cause I think it's just, I mean, again, I think it's something that hopefully most good strength coaches kind of have a system similar to this and have a thought process similar to this. But I think that just the way that you have it laid out, like I really like just the idea of having a funnel, because I do think that, and I definitely fall victim to this at times, but especially like young strength coaches, I think we fall in the trap of like we either almost get like paralysis by analysis of like there's so many exercises to pick from. How do I know what I should be picking? Or we also
yeah,
just get stuck with like, okay, we only ever need to squat, bench, and deadlift, and it's like that might not always be the best option either. So kind of just walk us through kind of your, maybe even just if you want to give us like a scenario of like, hey, I'm gonna pick this,
yeah,
I'm trying to train this, or I'm trying to do this, whatever you feel like is the best way to kind of just explain
yeah.
this to us.
Yeah, so I'll walk you through this. I had a longer YouTube video on my YouTube channel. It's called Strength Through Systems that basically goes through this whole presentation. I'll walk you through the same thing, just
What
probably
what
a 3-minute.
what's the name of your YouTube channel?
Strength Through Systems.
Strength Through Systems. Okay, cool. I'll definitely make
Yep.
sure I share that in the
Yeah.
notes with everybody as well, and I'll check it out
Yep.
with myself. So yeah, go ahead.
Just started that, so there's like 4 videos on it. So
Sweet. Cool. No, that's good.
but
I'm glad that, because
yeah,
this thing is part of this. I want to make sure that if I'm going to be, interviewing you, I want to make sure that we're sharing any
yeah,
extra good stuff that you're putting out there as well. So definitely, I'm glad you let me
yeah,
know that.
yeah. So basically, as a strength coach, every strength coach starts off not really knowing their system, not knowing how to make decisions in the weight room in real time. So this is something that took me 5 years to develop and really hone in on what we're actually trying to do for my standpoint, my system, to be able to select exercises appropriately in real time. So we've all been there as coaches, as like when an athlete comes in and they're like, oh, hey, I'm supposed to do this, but this hurts or that hurts. How we make a decision really tells the athlete how much faith we have in ourselves to make that decision. If we're stumbling over our words like, oh, well, you could do this, you could do that, like as an athlete, I'm not going to be very trusting of that. Oh, like this guy knows what he's doing. So being able to create like a filtering system or a funnel where we take our overall coach's knowledge, we then have the 3 facility constraints, the time, space, and equipment, and then being able to filter it down into a exercise selection, sets, reps, tempo, external load. And as we go through this funnel, we have equipment. Basically, if you have a leg press, do a leg press. If you don't have a leg press, you can't. Basically, if you don't have the equipment, you can't do that exercise. Space, if you don't have the space to do something, if you want to do sprints, but you only have a 5x5 piece of turf, can't do sprints. And then time, if you have 20 minutes, well, you're probably not going to be able to do 50,000 exercises within that 20-minute span. So those are the 3 facility constraints that should already be laid out before you ever get to making a decision or getting to your exercise library to be able to do that. So basically, after we have filtered through our equipment, time, and space, we then get to our exercise library, which is basically any variation within those 3 constraints that our athlete could do. Any variation, box squat, like it could be back squat, 18-inch box squat, 12-inch box squat, any type of variation that could go within that facility for that training session. These are my filtrations. So each level is just a filter, just like if you went to Zillow and you started clicking on like, I want 2-bedroom with 1 bathroom. It's just a filtration system. I just call it a funnel because it narrows down our overall knowledge into a specific thing we can give the athlete. So first one is, what is the primary joint? Is it the hip, shoulder, spine, knee, ankle, wrist? We then look at what is the primary movement of that joint. Is it hip flexion extension, internal, external, abduction, adduction, shoulder flexion, internal, going through whatever those are. And then being able to select what is the intent of the exercise. And I mentioned it earlier where that's a key question, because that's going to dictate the rest of those filters and understanding what exercise that needs to be actually selected. So basically the 4 main adaptations I have is execution, output, durability, and expression. Execution, learning the movement, how to do it. Output, driving as much load. Durability is being able to maintain specific positions for a long period of time. And then expression is going to be able to produce as much force in the shortest amount of time possible. Based off of those 4, after one of those is selected, we then get to the 4th filter, which is selecting the actual exercise. This is where we look at the assessment piece. What does the sport demand? What does this athlete need? Is there any injuries that have occurred? What things are going to put what exercise is going to put this athlete in the best place to succeed? Once we have selected the exercise, we've got 1/3 of that final equation. We then go into the next one, which is the volume. So sets, reps, tempo. And you can see execution is probably between 2 and 5 reps. High duration, so high tempo, taking a long time in positions, learning those positions. High sets, low load. We want the athlete to learn the exercise. We don't want them just loading at the bar and then just flailing their bodies in the air. We then look at output, 2 to 6 reps, duration low, sets low, load is very high. We then see durability, and we can walk through those and being able to select any of these. And then these are just guidelines too. There's not going to be a time where it's like, hey, on an output, if someone's doing an output, we're not going to go to 10 reps or we're not going to go to 15. Maybe it's like, hey, I want you to go as many reps as you can with this heavy load. These are just really good, simple guidelines to filtrate that specific thing we need. So now we have 2/3 of that equation. We have the exercise, we have the volume. We then look at the external load. This is where workload management comes in, knowing, hey, what did you do last week? What did you do a month ago? Have you been lifting at all in the past month? This allows us to have a better pinpoint, accurate representation of what load they can do. We select that. So then at the end, so this is all done in our heads as a coach. Whereas if Adam, if you came up to me like, hey, I can't do this exercise, what could I do? I've already gone to this where I can say, hey, well, this is an output exercise. We're going to do 4 sets of 2 at this load. You're good to go. And they're like, great, go get them. They can get after it. There's confidence in that answer. There's trust in that question or that answer to allow the athlete to actually know what they're doing is exactly what they need to do to have success in the long term.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think that just, I don't want to like, I don't know how to say this. I don't want to overhype it or oversimplify it, like underhype this, but like, it's so simple that it's genius to at the same time to an extent. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so it's one of those things where, and you're mentioning like the rep scheme and stuff like that. I mean, it's like a exercise selection version of basically like Prilipin's chart. Like I always go to Prilipin's chart to look like, okay, if I'm training at 85%, like what's the ideal rep scheme and, on down the line. So it's kind of, I like it. I just like the way that it flows. I like the way it looks. And again, I think that's something we haven't really got into that much and we may or may not have time for, but even remembering back whenever we interviewed Casey last year and just knowing what the environment is at KP, like you guys are just very systems approach, like systems driven approach, like kind of that first principles thinking of just kind of like whittling everything down to like what's the most like simple solution. And again, I think there's genius in being able to do that to an extent. So let me ask you a question on this. Like, if you're looking at this now from like a program design or even a periodization standpoint, are you thinking of some of these in like your like maybe your days? Like if you're kind of like following like a high-low model, where like one day would be like more of like an execution or a durability day, one day would be more of like an output and an expression day. One of your blocks might be like we have a new athlete coming in, it's going to be a lot more of like an execution and durability kind of training phase, and then they're going to eventually get to an output phase, and then eventually get to like an expression phase. Can you mention like obviously expression is kind of more like your rate of force development? Is that kind of, am I oversimplifying this? Am I making this too general? Like is that the reality of this, or is that kind of, am I not like thinking of that in the right context?
No, that's exactly right. You're in the right context. That's exactly how you would program it. You would have, so let's say you have output day, and then you would have like hybrid. I call it hybrid day, where it's like a lunge where you can do a lot of load, but it's not but you can also do 8 to 10, 12 reps. Whereas like an RDL, you might do 4 to 6 reps there. So I have basically output day, hybrid day, and then durability day, which obviously those coincide with this chart where in the output, we're going to select all the exercises that are going to be output driven. In the hybrid day, we're going to select the exercises that allow it to be more like volume, a little bit more volume sets and reps based. Whereas durability on that third day or Fridays for us would be then a durability day, lighter loads, maintaining specific positions based off of their throwing schedule.
Gotcha. So what have you guys, like, I know that was one of those things, kind of eye-opening things for me. And then obviously when I was with the Rockies, we kind of have a very similar philosophy, which is kind of what I still stick to now. What would that look like? Because you mentioned like Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. How would you kind of match this up specifically for baseball in this situation? But you could look at it as, basketball or like a hard football day or a hard basketball practice or whatever. Would you be matching up your high output days with your also like high intense practice days, and then your durability days with your higher volume sport skill days? Like, is that kind of how you would obviously try to pair this?
Yeah. So in a perfect world, you would try to pair everything with the corresponding throwing. So bullpen day with output day, durability with lighter throwing, longer volume day.
Right.
Again, that's not that's a perfect world, but a perfect world doesn't exist.
Mhm.
So the biggest determining factor on what days happen when is really, there's two main things. We have performance and we have development. You have these two things we can select from. When we think about training, is this player in a developmental phase where he needs to develop? Is he 140 pounds and weak? So in reality, when we think about our priorities is going to be development. That's the weight room. That's where we're going to be focused on. Where we might have an output day, then a bullpen. But his focus and his goal is to develop and become stronger, not so much perform. Whereas when we go to end season, or he gets older and he gets stronger and bigger, we now transition that into performance, where now we're going to change the lifting schedule. We're going to change those things. And I think I put it on here as well. I call it the if-then lifting schedule. I think it's on the
Yeah, no, you're good. I lost you for a minute, but you're back. You're good.
No, you're good. Yeah. Basically, and again, creating a system for it and just being able to know, like, if you pitch on Friday, we're going to lift you earlier in the week. We're going to lift you on Monday, Tuesday, give you 72 hours of recovery cycle. Whereas if, let's say, you pitch on Monday, we might push that back to Friday, Saturday. And that's where, from any sport, it's really looking at those game days, but understanding where the athlete is at in their career. Sophomore, freshman, like middle schoolers up to about sophomore year, they should be really focused on development for 6 years and allow the junior, senior year to be where performance takes the road. What I've seen over time is that athletes are so focused on performance so often that they never give them times to actually develop, so they never really actually see the potential because they're always worried about games. They're always worried about performance. And being able to take time and be like, hey, for the next 2 years or 6 months, I'm only going to focus on development. I'm going to still learn the skill. I'm still going to work on the skill, but my main focus is development. So when I ask myself, when I wake up that day as an athlete, what am I going to choose? Am I going to choose to lift really heavy, or am I going to choose to hone in on the skill? Well, if it's a developmental phase for you, then we're going to focus on that development piece, even though you may be a little tired, you may not PR in that specific bullpen, but we know in the long term, 2-3 years down the road, when you took those 6 months, they're going to be so much return on your investment than somebody that just trickles here and there on development. Whereas if you take those times from, like, in reality, like 6th grade to sophomore year should be development all the way, because that's going to set you up junior, senior year to have success that most of those kids will never experience just because they're so focused on performance.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've talked about. I think we probably talked about that with Casey on here as well, and we talked about that with I interviewed Mike Kesia. He was the Yankees rehab coordinator. We interviewed him a couple episodes back, and he worked with a lot. He's up in Canada now, working with a lot of youth athletes, and that's things like everybody. And I think a lot of it's their dads, and I think a lot of it's the travel baseball coaches. Like everybody wants to be the best 14-year-old baseball player, and it's like, yeah, but
Yeah,
that's fine. You can be the best 14-year-old baseball player, but how many of those 14-year-olds end up being healthy when they're 20, 21, 22 years old, and they're actually like in so much development. Younger by the time they're older teenagers, they put themselves kind of behind the eight ball, and it's
yeah,
definitely that like old like what do you want to call it, like the saying of like, would you rather have $1 million now or a penny that doubles every day? It's people
yeah,
can't look past that $1 million when they're 13 versus the penny that doubles every day. I want to
yeah,
I want to move into like this because I know I asked like one of the questions I ask is about like determining and prescribing loads, and sometimes we don't even get to ask that question. But I want to go to your, uh, you know, one of the things that you put on here. You talk about like a lifting algorithm that prescribes loads to show the athlete's progression. I
yeah,
know you sent me this chart, which I think is pretty cool. First
yeah.
of all, with this chart, is this in kilos? Like what is,
So
or is it like what's the
I'll explain what
relative
this
body?
is.
Like, what's
So
the here?
yeah, so
Yeah.
um, so when we look at load for an athlete in the weight room, what we've done in the past is really looked at tonnage, or just or tonnage is basically the thing, or volume in general. Sets times reps
Right.
times
Right.
weight. For one, tonnage misses tempo. So if I did something for 5 seconds instead of 1 second, that's going to be more. Well, that's going to be more stress. And this is
Yep.
where that volume only tells us half the picture. It doesn't tell us what they're doing. If I told you, and as a coach, if I ask which one's a harder exercise, back squat or a bicep curl, which one would you say?
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Did it, so when we look at, so volume and tonnage only calculates half the equation. The other half is the exercise itself. Because if an athlete did back squat and an athlete did a bicep curl, on paper, if we did the same volume, we're saying these two athletes did the same. But as a coach, we would all say, no, the kid that did the back squat is going to be way more fatigued. So being able to
Right.
have that and understand what that exercise is, how much more is a back squat stressful than a bicep curl. And it's really called, in research, it's called cognitive load, or basically how strenuous is the task at hand to complete that task. It's a lot harder to do a back squat correctly than a bicep curl based off of multiple variables. So that's what these numbers that you see on the graph is a combination, a weekly combination, based on their workload for that specific week. For every exercise, we have the exercise times the volume equals a certain value. We add those values up over a specific day, and then that accumulates over a week, which then gives us the score, which then allows us to see this progression over time and understand, like, okay, so if you look at the graph, I think it's in like week 7, 8, week 8, I believe, he went on vacation. And we knew that going into that week. So if you look, we spiked him above that red line, which is a 30% increase. Bottom line is a 10% decrease of training. And you see, we purposely brought him up over that line, knowing on the back end he was dipping because he knew he was on a cruise. He wasn't going to lift. So we knew that. So then he was in a better spot in week 9 to be able to see that progression. And then we see those 6 weeks after progressing pretty hard, leading into spring training to actually be able to show, hey, you're getting stronger week to week and putting you in the best chance possible to get better in the weight room, not create fatigueness and soreness, so he could learn the skill simultaneously leading into the spring.
You cut out there for a second for me. So just explain again how you're, because I think that's awesome. What you're saying makes sense. Like you knew, like, and that goes back to the idea of periodization of like you could have this perfect
Yeah.
8 week training block put together, but then the athlete decides, hey, I'm going to go on a vacation. Not that it was last minute, but they might decide last minute,
Yeah.
especially professional athletes. They do stuff last minute
Yeah.
sometimes. Like I'm going to go on vacation week 6, or I get a cold
Yeah.
for an entire week and I'm sick and I don't get to train for week 6. So it's a kind of a cool way to like continue to see like how do we get back on that trend. Very similar to like almost like an acute chronic workload ratio to an extent of just like what happens if you do take a week off, like how do we need to kind of progress you back a little bit. But how are you getting these numbers? So like what does 86.86 represent versus 14 or whatever that says 15.05? What do those numbers exactly represent?
Um, well, on the graph numbers themselves, it's just the cumulative weekly score of the volume times the cognitive load of that exercise for each exercise, which then allows us to see a better representation of fatigue. So it's basically
Okay.
volume times the cognitive load of that exercise. And we do that for every single exercise they do in the weight room. We do that for specific days over the weeks. We accumulate that into a single weekly value, and then we see that progression over time.
So then how are you determining the cognitive load, like in terms of like how you're factoring that into it? Like what is there a metric that you're using, or are you just like is it like RPE, or like what is the determining factor for the cognitive load?
Yeah, so there's an algorithm that I developed that has it's a multifactorial algorithm that takes multiple facets into it: load placement, stability, multiple different factors and variables for every single exercise, depending on what type of exercise it is, everything like that. That's what creates a cognitive load for that specific exercise, and we just plug that into with the volume. And then there's a math on the volume side of things. There is a difference of how math is actually calculated, just because if you did one rep, basically tonnage is wrong, because if you went from 1 rep to 2 reps, you would increase by 50%. But then if you went from 2 reps to 3 reps, you only increase by a third. But the stress level between reps 2 and 3 would be higher because you're under more stress. So I
Yeah,
had to be able to counteract that volume metric part of it, to allow it to be a better representation of what fatigue actually looks like from an actual lifting standpoint.
yeah, I see what you're saying. I think so. Two things that kind of stand out for me is like the idea of like one of the things that we did this year that I really liked with our football team during the spring is we did a lot more like of the APRE like tester sets and like okay that so to me like those are the only sets that really matter. Like all of our warm-up sets like 50, 60,
Yeah.
70, 75%, like the sets to me really didn't matter. The tonnage, which this still doesn't account for it totally as much as what you're saying here, but like the tonnage that we're hitting throughout that training session, the only ones that are really that like stressful are the tester set that we did, the APRE
Yep.
max rep set, and then maybe the following set after that, because now you're in a state of fatigue. So I think that's a huge aspect that we definitely need to account for. Is like, yeah, like all volume matters, but really it's really the only ones that are, like you said, that have that high level of not only physical stress, and physical, breakdown of tissues or whatever, but also from the mental side of it as well. So get
Yeah.
the kind of the question that I have from that would be, give me an example. So like if I'm kind of thinking about this, could I make the assumption that like anything that loads the spine, anything that has a high speed component would be ones that would have a higher um would rank higher up on that cognitive load versus like you said a bicep curl, like obviously a back squat would be very high cognitive load, especially a heavy back squat, like a 1 RM back squat and a 1 RM bicep curl. The 1 RM back squat has a much higher cognitive load. Is that
Yep.
kind of how your thought process was?
Yeah. So if I many exercises, or every exercise has a main category. Yeah, I break them down into 4 main categories. We have primary, which is our normal squat, bench, deadlift. We then have correctives, which is our mobility drills, stretches, stuff like that. Our med ball tosses or throws, and then we have plyometrics, any type of plyometric. So based off of those 4, an exercise is going to be selected within one of those 4. Within each one, there are multiple different variables. So like for primary exercises, we have stability, load placement. So stability would be stance. So if you're standing on 2 feet, that's more stable than if you're standing on 1. Or if you're standing on 2 and I go to a split stance, that's a little bit less unstable. So it's being able to create a gradient of stability through stance, constraints, points of contact. If I'm holding on to something that's stable, or if I'm on a machine, machines are very stable. They're going to have a very low cognitive load because they are very, very stable. And like you mentioned, barbell on your back, things on your back is a lot harder to stabilize and understand where you're at in space. For one, you can't see it. And two, you have to be able to shift your center of mass backwards while also not falling backwards. Whereas something that's front loaded, it's easier to shift your weight back because you have the weight out in front of you. So being able to create a gradient of stability, load placement, for correctives, it's lever length, plyometrics, it's how we're landing. Are we landing on 1 foot, 2 foot? It's all these different variables within these 4 main categories that either is making this exercise easier or harder to do. If you really want to build what the cognitive load does, it literally just tells us this exercise is easier than this exercise. And then just being able to create a number for that to then be able to track it and allow us to see true progression over time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's not just, it might not always be just adding more weight or more sets or more volume, more total volume. It might be, hey, we're going to actually make this training harder. The volume might stay the same, but we're going to make it more challenging because we're adding cognitive load versus just actual gravity, basically tonnage. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So I think that's cool, a cool way to think about it for sure. Definitely something to kind of consider and look into a little further. So, I know we're getting a little short on time, so maybe a little kind of do like a rapid fire. This is the first time we've ever done something like
Yeah.
this. So just a little rapid fire, a couple questions here. So, I do like to ask this question. What is like how do we measure success of the strength coach? Like what, and how can we as strength coaches sleep peacefully at night if we can ever?
How we measure our success as a strength coach is, did the athlete get off the field without having a non-contact injury? That's our job. We are so far removed from performance that we can never take credit for it. We can never have any, like, we can't take credit and we can't blame, because we have the uncontrollable, the athlete itself, the teammates on the actual field, the head coach playing that athlete, the skills coach. We are 7 layers removed from performance. Our job is, did this athlete get off the field healthy? The answer is yes. We did our job. Time to get back to work in the weight room.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, again, it's simple, but it's not simple. Like it's the right, it's a good answer. It's the right way to think about it, I think. Um, What about like the athletes that you guys been around? I know you guys got a bunch of pro guys there, guys that go up to
Yep.
college, guys that are in college. What kind of are the similarity, similar traits or the similarity behaviors that those guys have that are the ones that end up being the most successful?
Um, they do everything they need to. From a movement standpoint, it takes them 1 to 2 reps to do exactly what I asked them to do. Whereas lower end athletes, it may take 3 or 4 months or weeks for them to do the exercise correctly. Every pro guy, within 1 or 2 cues for any exercise, they have it perfectly done. And that's more of just an awareness piece on their end to be able to actually move their body in space, which then
Yeah,
means when they go to the mound, they're able to actually manipulate their hand in space to throw a strike or do whatever they need to do.
yeah. I think that I think that's definitely true. Like just the being a better having a little better kinesthetic awareness. What about like in
Yep.
their habits? What about like habits, behaviors, like even personality traits? Is there something that you see like, they're all type A personalities or type B? Like what are some personality things or characteristics, habits that there's very similar?
Yeah. Off the field or off the mound, I would say. Off the mound, when they're away from playing the sport, totally different athletes, totally different personalities, every which way. We have type A guys, we have type Z guys. It's all over the place from a pro standpoint. But they all have one thing. When they step on the mound to actually throw, they flip a switch to be able to compete and lock in and do their thing. And it's okay to be who you are outside of that. But that's the singular trait that all have. They all are super competitive. They all want to do great when they get on the mound. And the second they get off, it's like, okay, like I'm back to whoever I was.
Yeah.
And younger athletes, it's hard for them to do. They're trying to be the happy-go-lucky person when they're on the mound. Or they're trying to be like, it's being able to switch between those traits and switch between those type of personalities.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like the Mamba mentality. Like you got to be able to
Yeah.
have, you got to be able to find your like your inner Kobe, your inner Michael Jordan, like and
Yeah.
just be a dog and just get after it. And again,
Yeah.
pitching like pitchers are weird because like you don't think of them as being like needing to be like tough, like gritty guys, but like
Yeah.
the
Oh,
ones that
yeah.
I've been around that has been successful, like that's kind of how they are. Like there's just something different
Yeah.
about them.
Yep.
What about like because obviously like a lot of my like GAs interns are gonna listen to this. Like, what do you think are something that maybe when you were a younger coach? I know we're both kind of still young coaches, I would say, but
Yeah.
when you were a younger coach, things that you maybe struggled with that you've gotten better at now, or things that you've basically biggest like areas of growth.
I would say first thing is you as a coach, we have to build our own systems. Every coach has a system. We have to be able to structure that system, being able to explain that, how organized is that system, and then we have to actually speak it, which means communicate that system. And that's ultimately how we're, as a coach, we provide value to the athletes, to the head coaches, to the skill coaches that we're eventually going to work with.
Mm.
If we don't have a system of our own, and most coaches, when they start out, I definitely didn't. I had no idea what I was doing. I just took bits and pieces of everyone else's system and created a pseudo system, I guess. And then over the years, you slowly progress into being able to have your system approach. And then it's being able to structure that in an easy, organized fashion, like the exercise funnel is an example of one of mine. And then being able to actually communicate that and be like, hey, this is how I'm going to provide value to your team. This is and being able to communicate that is probably another big aspect behind that is like, are we communicating our value as a strength coach?
Yeah. So that kind of ties into like my last question, and I want to have one follow up real quick, but like you obviously you're about to start a new job, which that'll be my last
Yeah.
question. What do you think like makes like young coaches like what do you think is their best method for getting better? Like obviously you mentioned it's very similar to me. You read a lot of stuff, you're watching a lot of videos, listening to a lot of podcasts. Like, I mean, is there a one best method, or is it just be a constant learner? Like, what do you think is like the most important thing for a young coach to get themselves better?
Um, First and foremost, as a young coach, be a better human being. Be a decent human being that people want to be around,
Yeah.
that people like being around. That is the biggest skill. That is the biggest thing you can improve on. So when it comes to reading books, lifting books, great. Everything from there. But reading books that allow you to grow better as a human being is going to skyrocket you above everyone else, regardless of your systems and regardless of your skill level as a strength coach. It's being able to be liked and being able to be yourself in that and not change based off of that. So becoming a better human being is probably the first. And then looking at how you go about creating systems for your athletes and then being able to communicate that clearly.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think being again, when I'm looking for coaches, when I'm looking for interns, GAs, like that's a huge aspect. Last question, real quick.
Yep.
So obviously you're taking over at Indian Rocks Christian School. What's
Yeah.
uh what's maybe like the most exciting part about that? Like, what are you most looking forward to, and then what are you maybe like a little nervous about?
Yeah, biggest thing I'm excited about is the greater impact to have on multiple athletes. In that sense, being able to see all ages from middle school all the way up to high school and being able to have an impact on a greater scale and working with other coaches as well, being able to help them create systems, being able to do that and being able to progress their skill level as well. And then probably the most biggest thing for me from a nervousness standpoint is can the things I've built here systems wise work over there? And then being able to get the trust of the people that I'm working with on a day to day basis.
Yeah, no, I think that's always. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where you've been at a place for so long and you've been able to develop a system, but you've built that system around the environment that you're in. So now you're going to be going to a completely different environment. So
Yeah.
I think you'll do fine, man. Honestly, like I said, this is awesome. I wish we had had a chance to talk for another hour.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your time, and definitely looking forward to staying in a little better touch. I guess we haven't really communicated as much over the years as what I'd like
I would
to.
love to do this as much as you want.
Definitely
it helps
stay.
me organize my ideas. So
definitely staying in touch. Remind us again what the YouTube channel's name is again.
Strength Through System.
Strength. I want to make sure I get that in the notes, and I'll get on there and watch some of the videos actually right now. And then sorry, I'm typing that in. Man, like I said, appreciate it. Let you go here. Definitely keep me in the loop to see how things are going with the new gig, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Adam. See you.
Yep. Good luck. Thank you.